Hello and welcome to the channel. I'm Annie and this is Stanley and we're here to talk about books. In today's video we're going to go through all the books I read in April, which was a very exciting month for me because of the Magical Readathon, which I discovered earlier in the year and is a year-long annual reading challenge set up and created by G from Book Roast. And one aspect of it is that there is a map where you can make decisions about which way you want to go, and your route choice gives you prompts for a book to read each month. And then also in April and September, there are University of Aurelium semesters in which you pick a degree subject that you want to work towards. And then you get prompts based on the different classes you have to take to complete that course. And I'm working towards the Star Whisperer course, and that gave me various prompts that I had to fulfill, which helped me choose which books I was going to read. So in terms of where I'm at so far, January on the map was setting out, and you had to read a book that was published in 2024, and I read The Burial Plot by Elizabeth McNeil. And then you had to choose a direction, and I chose West, which meant I had to pick a book from the left-hand side of my TBR shelf, for which I picked The Winter House by Nikki Gerard. And I will get into the other prompts as I go through the books. And I'm also doing the Reddit Fantasy Bingo Challenge, which I also discovered just in time for it to start at the beginning of April. And that is a whole bingo card of 25 different prompts, which you have to fulfill with science fiction, fantasy, or horror books, which is interesting for me because I have been a very avid fantasy reader in the past, with some sci-fi mixed in, but I haven't been reading that many genre books recently, so that's been a great prompt to get me to get back into those kinds of books. I have to credit Becca in the Books, one of my favourite booktubers, for telling me about these wonderful and exciting challenges. So we are going to go through all of the books that I read in April, and I will go through what prompts they fulfilled for the various challenges. But first of all, let's make some tea. So here we go for today's tea selection. Let's see what the dice have in store. 0, 8. So that's going to be Jade Oolong Rose. Good choice, good choice. So this is the teapot that used to sit on my desk at work back when I had an office job. Do not miss that job in any way at all. But haven't used the teapot in a while, so it's nice to get the teapot back in rotation because it's pretty cute. Okay. Thank you to good old Past Me for boiling the kettle. And there we have a lovely pot of Jade Oolong Rose. Excellent. So now that we've got our tea, always very important, let's get on to the books. So in my introductory video for my channel, I said that it's not likely that I'm going to be reading much popular contemporary romance. And then it turns out that the very first book that I'm reviewing on YouTube is a contemporary romance novel, which is A Beach Read by Emily Henry. Now, the reason that this came about is that the March prompt for the Magical Readathon was making friends on the road, and the prompt was to read a book that was based on a recommendation from someone online that I didn't already know. So I went and watched a video by Olive's Book Nook about some of the books that she'd been reading, and she was talking about Beach Read. And I had heard about it a lot from different booktubers throughout last year. And because it's about writers, and I'm a writer myself, it did kind of appeal. So I thought, why not give it a go, see what happens. So in terms of a brief plot synopsis, our protagonist, January Andrews, is a romance writer. And for various reasons, she's spending the summer in her recently deceased father's holiday home, trying to write her latest book. And she discovers that next door, a literary author, Augustus Everett, is also living, and he's writing his book. And through various weird and wonderful circumstances, they end up making a bet whereby they decide they're going to try and write a book in each other's genre. And as you would expect, shenanigans ensue. So in terms of this book, I went in with a bit of apprehension because I'm not really a romance reader, although I have enjoyed some in the past. And it really took me by surprise in a lot of ways, some good, some bad. Mostly because it felt like it was kind of a mashup of about 4 different books. So the colour palette and the picture and all of the text on the cover and the first couple of chapters all suggested that it was going to be a quirky comedy. And then later on, there was quite a lot of deep emotional background to the characters that led some weight to it. We also had some quite intense sexual tension that led to some fairly spicy scenes later on in the book. And then there was the angsty melodrama when they failed to communicate and didn't know what was going on and were falling out with each other. So it kind of felt like it went back and forth in a lot of different genres in some ways, which was a bit jarring. The thing that I most enjoyed was all of the stuff about the writing. A lot of that was very relatable, it was very funny, it was very realistic. All of that was great. But the biggest problem is that it made me want to stop writing another novel, and I can't do that at the moment because I have several that I need to finish before I can start a shiny new idea, so not so great from that point of view. In terms of the spice, I do not mind that in books. I don't find explicit content offensive in any way, but I do often find it a bit boring. For me, it only really works if it's informed by the characters' personalities and their backstories and the interactions that they've had with each other, and that you get some kind of character in the explicit scenes to make it more interesting than it just being the mechanics of what they're doing. And there was some of that in this, but not as much as I probably would have preferred. I did find it a bit eye-rolly in places, but it did manage to avoid several of the really common romantic tropes that I've heard about in romance novels and experienced in the books that I've read before I really dislike, so I appreciated that. It did make me laugh out loud quite a lot on a train on the way to somewhere when I was reading it, which my husband Dave found very amusing. One thing I did find a bit off-putting is that the protagonists were meant to be 29 and 32, but in the way that they spoke to each other and the way they acted and the things that they said and did, they really came across as if they were in their mid-40s to me, which I quite enjoyed because I'm in my mid-40s, so I found that relatable. But every time it mentioned their ages, it kind of took me out of the story because it took me by surprise. It did ramp up quite a bit towards the end. Some of it was quite ridiculous, some of it was very emotive, some of it was very relatable, so again, quite a mixed bag. And the ultimate conclusion had both one of the most romantic things that I have ever read in a book, but was also a bit dissatisfying to me in some ways, so I think maybe I'm a bit hard to please. Overall though, I'm glad I read it. I enjoyed it overall. I'm probably going to be passing it along to my mum to read, so that's quite an endorsement. And I have rated it 3.5 stars. So that was Beach Read by Emily Henry. I'm not sure I'm going to be jumping to go and find more of her books, but if I come across one, maybe I'll give it a try. We'll see how it goes. So yeah, not a bad start. So the next book I read was for the April Magical Readathon prompt, and I should have mentioned earlier that I actually read Beach Read in March, but because I was talking about the Magical Readathon and also because it's a book that I've seen mentioned a lot on BookTube and I thought people might be interested in my views on it, I thought I would review that as well as all of my April books. So the actual first book I read in April was for the April Map Magical Readathon prompt, in which I crossed the river, and so I had to find a book with river in the title, and I picked The River of No Return by B. Ridgway. And in this book, our protagonist, Nick Davenant, is transplanted from 1812 on the battlefield into 2003 and discovers that he can travel through time because of being in danger of his life, and that's how most people find out that they can travel through time. And he is recruited by a mysterious organization called the Guild, made up of these time travelers who are waging some kind of war with shadowy enemies who are trying to disrupt the timeline in some way. And meanwhile, we also have a thread back in 1815 with Julia Percy, who is a young woman who also has the ability to manipulate time, and she is struggling with keeping her family estate together after the death of her grandfather. So that's where we are with that. It also fulfills the Reddit fantasy bingo challenge Stranger in a Strange Land square, because that has to be someone who is thrust into a completely different culture. And I figured that Nick, being jumped 200 years into the future, would fulfill that. So it's quite a chunky book. It's over 500 pages. It did take me a little bit to get into it. It's a bit of a slow start. I'm not sure I was quite in the right frame of mind for it to begin with. And there's an awful lot of telling, I have to say. It's one of my major gripes about this book. We're told a lot of things about how the characters are feeling, but not really shown it, and it's not massively consistent. So I found it a bit difficult to connect to. And in particular, one of the main issues I had with this was the romance. I've read a couple of books recently. This is the second book where it's a female author and there's a male protagonist, and it's very much closely from the male protagonist's point of view. And his attitude to women and the way he treats women is just absolutely appalling. He just objectifies everybody that he comes across. He's really mean to his sister for no apparent reason. And the way that he thinks about and talks to the love interest, and it's not a spoiler to say that the romance is between Nick and Julia, because that's fairly obvious from the beginning. And it just gave me the ick. I mean, I really couldn't get on board with it. The other main issue was that even though it is over 500 pages long, not an awful lot actually happens. Nick's given a mission by the guild and sent back to 1815 to undertake it, but we're not really told what he's meant to be doing. He's not really told what he's meant to be doing until over halfway through the book. And then even after that, once the mission gets underway, there's an awful lot of chat, there's an awful lot of conversations, there's an awful lot of debate, but not an awful lot of doing. And by about 100 pages before the end, I was really worried, because I had absolutely no idea how any of the plot threads were going to be tied up. And then it turned out that they weren't, because this is the first in a series, which was then cancelled by the publisher. So there isn't any more. And I was kind of a bit upset about that. And it's my fault, because I should have done a bit more research before I started. Because despite everything I've said, overall, I actually quite enjoyed this. The writing is really good. There's a lot of intrigue. There's a lot of interesting stuff about being transplanted in time, various ethical dilemmas about trying to change what may or may not have happened in the past. All of that is really good. There's a lot of really good setup in this book, but unfortunately not going to find out what happened, which is a bit of a shame. But overall, I did actually quite enjoy it, even though there were aspects about it that really didn't work for me, and I gave it 3.5 stars. So the next book that I went on to was actually an audiobook, and it fulfilled the Magical Readathon prompt for the Lore course, Lore, which was a book with a musical term in the title, and I chose Royal Airs by Sharon Shin, so that's AIRS, as in air on a G string, so I'm making that count. And this is the second in Sharon Shin's Elemental Blessings series, which is a series that is very close to my heart and also tattooed on my arms. And so I've been rereading it because I recently discovered that there's a new one in the series that I haven't read yet, and it's been a while, so I thought I would go and revisit. So this is number 2. This is a fantasy romance series which follows in the same world each book, but it focuses on a different couple each time, which I think is fairly common in romance series. And so in this one, the protagonist is one of the princesses, Josetta, who was in the previous book along with her sister Corinne, and they were both I think they were 12 and 15 in the first book, and they're 17 and 20 in this one. And I pretty much enjoyed it. I don't think I'm enjoying the series as much as I thought I would from previous memories of it, but it's a fun ride. I love the world building. I love all of the characters. It's a bit reductive, I find, because they base their kind of actions and their interpretations of people's characters on 5 different character types, and it's a bit like with astrology where we have 12 star signs and they only have 5, and so it feels a bit reductive because they're kind of boxing up people into one of these 5 different categories, and it means that there doesn't seem to be an awful lot of variation and individuality. But still, it's good, it's fun, I enjoyed it. It had a lot more excitement and action and a much higher body count than I remembered, and certainly than was in the first book. There wasn't really an awful lot happened in the first book, if I'm honest, but there's an awful lot of different plot threads in this one. There's stuff to do with the heir to the kingdom and mysteries and threats around that. There's development of flying cars, which is quite fun. There's the romance between Giussetta and the male protagonist, Rafe. There's an awful lot of intrigue around foreign dignitaries from other kingdoms in the world. So there's an awful lot going on. There's not a lot of conflict in the romance itself, which I don't mind at all. It was quite sweet and quite lovely. But everything comes together in quite an interesting way in the end. And there's a bit of a cliffhanger ending to lead into book 3. So I am very much looking forward to moving on. And much like the other books that I have discussed so far, I have given it 3.5 stars. So it's a bit of a 3.5 star month, because that's also what I gave the next book in the list, which is House of Correction by Nikki French. And this fulfills the inscription prompt for the inscription class in the Magical Readathon, which was to read the first sentences of 3 different books and then pick one based on that. And the first sentence of this book is, "The screaming started at 3 a.m. So that definitely caught my attention. This book follows Tabitha, who has been arrested for a murder in her small seaside village and is in prison at the start of the book awaiting her trial. For various reasons which felt, I mean, I understood why, but it just did seem a bit ridiculous. She decides quite early on to represent herself in the trial, which obviously isn't generally looked upon as a good idea in the justice system, but I do understand why it happened both in the book, because she had reasons for not trusting her solicitor and not thinking that a solicitor would be able to help her, and also in terms of the dramatics of the story, because if she wasn't doing that, she'd just be sitting around in prison waiting for the trial and then sitting around in the courtroom watching other people conduct the trial. So this gives her a much more active role. I actually quite enjoyed this. It was a bit slow in the first half. It was quite repetitive because she just kept going over and over the details of the case, and the mundanities of prison life were very similar. But then, yes, prison life probably is quite monotonous. And yes, if you're preparing for a trial, you do go over the details of the case over and over again. So it was realistic, but maybe a little bit tedious. The heart of the first half is in the relationships that she builds and the interaction she has with the other prisoners that she comes across during her time incarcerated. And I could have done with more of that because I really liked a lot of the peripheral characters, but they weren't really in it much. Then it takes quite a dramatic turn in the second half. We get the trial, and that's actually really good. The tension was ramped up, the emotion was ramped up. I thought that it was portrayed really well. I warmed to Tabitha a lot more. She's very much the underdog, and I was definitely rooting for her during the trial. And much like with The River of No Return, by 100 pages from the end, I had no idea where it was going to go. I had no idea how it was going to get wrapped up. Luckily with this one, because it's a standalone, it did get wrapped up, and I was pretty happy with how it turned out. It wasn't what I was expecting. Took me a bit by surprise, which is pretty good in this kind of thriller book. So yeah, I would recommend it if you like explorations of characters undergoing difficult times in prison. The main reason why it was interesting all the way through was because Tabitha herself isn't 100% sure whether she's innocent or not, so that adds an extra couple of layers of intrigue and depth and interest to the book. So yeah, 3.5 stars for this one. Solid read, enjoyed it. So the next book is another audio book, but unfortunately it's not going to count as what I intended. I picked it for the alchemy course in the Magical Readathon challenge, which was to read a book where the title is in all capitals. And I picked Long Live Evil by Sarah Rees Brennan, which I had heard, I think, from Becca in the Books again. So she's informed quite a lot of my reading this month. So thanks, Becca. This is about a young woman called Ray who is dying of cancer, and she gets the opportunity to step into her sister's favourite fantasy book series and go on a quest to find the flower of life and death, which, if she manages to find it and bring it back, will save her in the real world. So I thought it sounded quite interesting in terms of, again, much like Beach Read, with the cover and the style of it and the concept. I thought it might be quite silly, quite quirky, quite humorous. And the opening actually really surprised me because there was quite a lot of emotional depth in Ray's interactions with her sister while she's in hospital, and that kind of drew me in. But unfortunately, once she got into the book, that wasn't really maintained. The emotional aspect of it kind of got drained away. Initially, when she first steps into the books, it was really entertaining because there was a lot about fantasy tropes and there was a lot about how books work. I love a meta narrative, and it was quite interesting to see Ray's experience of being inside the book. But it also was really overcomplicated. The world building was really difficult to follow. And I actually found it quite difficult to follow the story as well once she was inside the book. And yeah, I don't know, the interest in it just sort of drained away. And since it's quite a long book, and it's also the first in a series, and I was pretty sure I wasn't going to want to carry on, I decided to give up, unfortunately. So that was a DNF for me. I should also say, if anybody is following along with the Magical Readathon, or anybody's interested in joining in partway through the year and is a bit intimidated by the number of books that I seem to be reading for it, each of the callings, as the courses are called, have, I think, 4 or 5 prompts for the spring equinox semester. But you also have the opportunity to add on extra credit by doing more courses than you need, because we are logging our page numbers and saving dragons by every time we get up to a certain number of pages as a group. So that's quite fun. So I've been adding in extras. So not all of the books that I've picked are specific to my Star Whisperer course. So I've been filming my April reviews in batches as the month goes on, and I've never done this before, so I was a little bit concerned that I wouldn't have enough to say about each book to make a decently lengthed video, and it turns out that that is not the case, and I've possibly gone too far in the other direction, not least because I seem to be reading a ridiculous number of books this month. I am blaming the Magical Readathon, not that blame is required, because it's been tremendously fun and I've really been enjoying prioritising my reading. So the second batch of books that I have read in April starts with Blackwater Sister by Zen Cho, which has been on my shelf for quite a while, but the Magical Readathon prompts and the bingo squares from the Reddit Fantasy Bingo Challenge have got me to pick it up, which was pretty good. In terms of Magical Readathon, this fulfills the prompt for the Psionics and Divination class for a book involving witches or the occult, and since there are gods and lots of rituals going on, I think that counts. It turns out that I had actually read another book by this author before, Sorcerer to the Crown, which is very different because it's historical, it's Regency set, and it's also set in England, whereas this one is modern day set, which I didn't know, and set in America and Malaysia. That's one of the interesting things about it. There's some really good layering of cultures, because the protagonist, Jess, who is also queer, which is an added interest to the book as well, grew up in the US, but she is ethnically Chinese, and her parents are from Malaysia. So when they move back there, they join the Chinese community in Malaysia. So it's quite a lot of interesting culture stuff going on. In terms of the plot, Jess is a young woman who, as I said, is moving back to Malaysia with her parents. And it turns out that she's being possessed, haunted rather, by the ghost of her recently deceased grandmother. And shenanigans ensue because various of the gods get involved, and she has to take on missions to try and stop terrible things from happening. I pretty much enjoyed this book. It was a bit slow. There was a lot of talking about what they were going to do rather than a lot of doing. It is very well written. There's good queer representation. Jess is struggling a bit because she hasn't come out to her family, and that causes some difficulties in her relationship with her girlfriend, Sharanya. They're in a long-distance relationship, which is a bit of a shame because I could have done with seeing a bit more of her. But yeah, the action was interesting because it was definitely at a remove, because Jess's agency was quite literally removed because her grandmother would take over her body and she wouldn't be in control anymore. So that caused some problems for me. But yeah, it wasn't a bad book. I would give it 3 stars. Next, we have The Word for World is Forest by Ursula K. Le Guin. And this fulfills the astronomy prompt from the Magical Readathon, which was a colour wheel and it randomly selected yellow, so that worked for me. And in terms of the Reddit Fantasy Bingo Square, this was the recycled square, so you had to choose a square from a previous year's bingo card, and I chose forest setting, which is definitely the case with this book. I thought this was very well written. The initial viewpoint character in this is absolutely appalling, and it was really quite difficult to read his viewpoint because he is wildly offensive, massively misogynistic, racist, lots of toxic masculine egomania, anti-veganism, anti-environmentalism, lots of colonialist attitudes, absolutely horrifying, which was deliberate, obviously, because he is a despicable character and you want to see him get his comeuppance, but it was quite a tough read from the opening. Interestingly, there wasn't any homophobia because the army in the future apparently encourages and supports homosexuality amongst the soldiers, so that was interesting. In terms of the plot, it's about humans going to a forest planet and exploiting it for timber and stealing all the resources, and what happens when the indigenous natives decide that they've had enough. It is brutal. There's content warnings. Definitely look up the content warnings. It was a tough read, very, very effective, very well written, but not easy to read. And it is very bleak and very sad, but very impactful with it. So I would recommend it if you want hard-hitting sci-fi with themes about colonialism and quite a lot of violence. It's pretty grim. But along with The Three by Sarah Lotz, which I read for the Illusion prompt from Magical Readathon, which was a book that I was planning to read anyway, was the prompt. This brings me to the conclusion of my main Magical Readathon objective, which was to complete the requirements for the Star Whisperer calling path. And I have done that because I have done Law, Inscription, Psionics and Divination, Astronomy and Illusion. So I feel very good about that. And any other books that I read in the month of April are just going to be bonus extras and also contributing to the overall page count across the whole community for rescuing the dragons. So I'm not going to stop here. One other thing that I want to talk about is actually a video game that I've been playing recently because it fulfilled a Reddit Fantasy Bingo Square of not a book, because it was a video game, so that worked. It was something my brother recommended to me, a really lovely game called Wonder Stop, where you play a gladiator who suddenly started losing fights and goes into the forest to seek out a mentor to help her retrain, and ends up collapsing and being rescued by a man who runs a tea shop in a magical valley. His name is Borrow, and he is now my favourite character in anything ever. He is absolutely delightful, and I really enjoyed spending time with him. It's a very cozy game. There are things you can do, sweeping up leaves, collecting plants, growing components, brewing tea, interacting with the customers, but you don't have to do any of it. You can wander about as much as you like. You can sit and look at the view. You can drink tea yourself, which I very much enjoyed. The tea making process is a lot of fun. There are customers who are progressively get weirder and weirder in their storylines and what they want you to do. But there is a fantastic book of answers that you can consult at any time to tell you what recipe to use, so you never have to get stuck and you never have to go away from the game to look stuff up. I thought it was gorgeous, really fun, really soothing, really enjoyable. biggest problem was it was too short. So my solution to that was that as soon as I finished, and I actually cried when it was over because I didn't want to stop, I just went back and started again. So I'm playing through again and making slightly different choices for the character. So highly recommend. 4.5 stars, I would say, because it was a bit buggy. Things went a bit wrong sometimes, and I didn't necessarily feel as though the character's learning journey was fully realised by the end, but massively enjoyed it and would definitely recommend if you're looking for a cozy game about tea. As you see, I like tea, so it was good for me. So next on my book pile is The Paris Express by Emma Donoghue, which I borrowed from my good friend Cressy, who runs the reading retreats that I go on. This was in the Reading Retreat library, and it fulfilled the Magical Readathon extra opportunity prompt of the Leyline train conductor by having a train on the cover, so that was excellent timing there. This is an interesting book. It takes place over the course of 7.5 hours of a train journey in 1895. Train is heading towards Paris. There are hints that it's heading for disaster, but you don't necessarily know what's going to happen from the start. What was interesting about it was that up until this point in the month, I've been reading over 100 pages a day, which is a lot for me. It's zooming through the books. And for some reason, this one really slowed me down, and it took me 4 days to read the first half, which was only 130 pages. Because, I don't know, it's very well written, and I was enjoying it, but it doesn't really work as a cohesive story to begin with, because it's very fractured, very short chapters, many viewpoints. By the halfway point, we had 15 viewpoint characters and 30 other passengers on the train that had been introduced. It was a lot to keep track of, and it was all mostly in-depth character studies, very well written ones, but it wasn't really kind of putting itself together as a proper story. That very much changed towards the end, and I actually read the second half in one day, which is a good indication of the pacing of the book. It's very slow to start off with and definitely ramps up the tension and the action towards the end. Pretty grim in places. There was a very explicit and not particularly pleasant sex scene in the middle, quite graphic childbirth content, so be aware if that's stuff that you're not that keen on. But overall, yeah, I thought it was pretty good. It definitely got me invested in what was going on, and I was on the edge of my seat in a cafe in North London, reading the last few pages with my heart in my mouth. So yeah, pretty good overall. I would give this 3.5 stars. Next we have The Weight of Silence by Heather, I can never remember this author's name, Heather Gundenkauf. It's quite a name. And this is a bonus class that I've taken in the Magical Readathon Spring Equinox syllabus, Demonology, for a book with a missing person. And this takes place almost in real time, actually, over the course of one day. So similar to the Paris Express, one day in a small American town. Again, lots of fractured, very short chapters, only like 2 to 5 pages, lots of multiple viewpoints. So very much like the Paris Express again. Very different subject matter, though. Very early in the morning, it's discovered that 2 7-year-old girls have gone missing, and the rest of the book is the police and their families trying to find them and trying to figure out what's happened. It was pretty good. I read it pretty fast. Interestingly, it went in my head from being very much a I want to find out what happens book rather than an I'm enjoying the journey of reading this book. And then about the halfway point, it flipped to being an enjoying the journey book. And then it flipped back again before the end. So I had quite a roller coaster of a ride with this one. There were certain aspects that I really enjoyed. The older brother of one of the missing girls has a viewpoint narrative, and I really enjoyed his voice and his arc. He was probably my favourite character. There was some interesting psychological aspects because one of the 7-year-olds hasn't spoken since she was 4. And a lot of the book is to do with why that's the case and how it affects her and those around her. My main gripe was the dialogue. It was very clunky dialogue, and there weren't nearly enough contractions to make it sound natural as people really speaking. And I thought the character of the father of one of the girls came across as a bit of a caricature. The tension in the ultimate climax was also a bit diminished by the fact that one of the police officers predicted exactly what was going to happen, and then it played out exactly as he had predicted. So that kind of made it a bit anticlimactic in some ways. Pretty depressing, actually, overall. Not a jolly book. But there was some good resolution at the end and some hints of hopefulness at the very end of the book. So again, pretty much enjoyed it. 3 stars from me. So the next book that I finished in April was The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin, and I listened to the audiobook, which I think was a very good way to experience it because the narrator was absolutely fantastic, and it also had some sound effects which added to the atmosphere. Now, brief plot synopsis, I'm not sure I can give you one. It's about cities becoming sentient and picking human avatars for different aspects of them. The city in question in this book is New York, so you have a primary avatar that encompasses the whole city, and then one for each of the boroughs. I have met N.K. Jemisin, and she is phenomenal, and I really loved her Broken Earth series. The whole trilogy I thought was one of the best trilogies I've ever read. I wanted to love this. I really did, because I think she's great, but it just didn't work for me somehow. It's excellent world building, excellent immersive writing, really fantastic range of characters. As I said, the audiobook narrator was great. It just, for some reason, just didn't work for me. I think it was very, very good. I just didn't really enjoy it that much. The themes, which are often a strong point in N.K. Jemisin's work, social justice, police brutality, racial inequality, prejudice, all sorts of stuff like that, all really great stuff. It just felt a bit sledgehammery for me in this one. There wasn't an awful lot of nuance or not an awful lot of subtlety, but perhaps in this day and age, that's what you need to get your message across. I don't know. The other thing that I found difficult about it was that I really wanted all of the characters to get together and start working together to fulfill their mission. And it just kept basically starting over again with a different avatar becoming an avatar and figuring out what was going on. So it just felt as if the book started again 5 or 6 times without actually moving on with the plot ever. By the end, it did pick up, and I thought the ending was really good, but probably not enough for me to want to read the sequel. So I'm going to give it 3.5 stars. So after that, I moved on to the audiobook of Sipsworth by Simon Van Boeie, I think. Don't know if that's how you say it. I apologise if that is wrong. This is a story about an 83-year-old woman living alone in England. She has moved back from Australia after losing her husband and her son, and having lived in Australia for 60 years. And through various circumstances, she comes to befriend a mouse. And the introduction of the mouse into her life leads on to other things. Let's say, I don't want to give too much away. It's a very small story, but in the best possible way. It involves one of my favourite tropes, which is found family. I appreciated the elderly protagonist, and I really liked Helen as a character, and I particularly liked the way her attitudes and thoughts about things changed over the course of the book. It's a pretty short book, and I think the story fits quite well within the runtime. The audio narrator was pretty good, and yeah, I enjoyed it. It was pretty depressing for probably the first third, I have to say, which was kind of the point, because Helen's life was quite sad and lonely to begin with, but it did make it a bit of a tough listen to get through that section. And I think the only reason that I managed to get to the slightly nicer bits of it was because it was so short. I should have said, damn it, I've messed it up. I should have said that the N.K. Jemisin, The City We Became, fulfilled the Magical Readathon alchemy prompt, which was a title in all capitals on the book, and also the Reddit Fantasy Bingo Square for an author of colour. And Sipsworth I picked because it fulfilled the Impling Sitter certificate, which is a bonus opportunity from the Magical Readathon and required a book with an animal familiar. So that's why I picked those two. And the next one that I read was The Apothecary's House by Adrian Matthews, which fulfilled the bonus opportunity from the Magical Readathon of Bog Cataloguer, for which it needed to have a body of water on the cover. And the cover of The Apothecary's House is the frozen river in Amsterdam with a bridge over the top. So yeah, that one is set in Amsterdam, and it's about a woman named, oh God, I've forgotten her name. Rachel. Yes, Rachel, who's an art historian and works at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. And part of her job is to investigate claims by people who come to the museum to say that their art and their family heirlooms were stolen or appropriated by the Nazis in the Second World War, and they want to claim them back. And at the start, an elderly woman called Lydia turns up to the museum and says that they have in their collection a painting that belongs to her family. And the story is about the team, Rachel and Miles, her partner at work, going to investigate the claim and figure out what's going on. There's also some intrigue because someone starts threatening Rachel quite early on and saying that she needs to stop doing the investigation. So there's intrigue and mystery around that. But I have to say that for the large part, the actual most important aspect of the book is the relationships between the characters, which I really enjoy in a book. There is a vast array of really excellent characters in this book, and it's much more about what happens between them and their dynamics than it is about the mystery. One of the other things that surprised me was I was expecting it to be quite pacey, quite sparse, quite thrillery. And in actual fact, the writing is incredibly rich, really immersive detail, really fantastically wonderful imagery, and surprising turns of phrase that I actually really enjoyed. Although, for a book written in 2005, a lot of the descriptions of the characters of colour and the queer characters and various other aspects of the book and the world, it's a bit iffy in terms of the language used, so not quite sure what that's about. So that was a bit problematic and pulled me up quite frequently. But overall, I thought the writing was really good. I did get a bit bogged down with the technical details and all of the ins and outs of the history of the painting somewhere in the middle. And then it did get a bit melodramatic at the end, I have to say. It did kind of, the pacing really ramped up towards the end. And I was reading it a lot faster and not maybe enjoying it as much. So I think I probably could have done without some of the wild excitement at the end. But overall, yeah, I thought it was pretty good. I picked it next because it was over 700 pages long, and I really wanted to slow down with my reading because it's getting a bit silly at this point. And then I read it in 2 days. But I am blaming G from Book Roast, who created the Magical Readathon, although, again, blame is not appropriate because we had the 24-hour reading sprints all-nighter for the Magical Readathon yesterday and overnight into today, and I loved it. It was so much fun, really connecting with the community and playing all the games and racking up the points and stuff. It was really fun. So yeah, I ended up reading The Apothecary's House in the space of 2 days, and so now I have to go and find more books to read to fill up the remaining 10 days of April and add to my quite frankly ridiculous total of reading for the month. So I will see you when I've read some more books. Look what Dave has done to my TBR piles. I said I was looking forward to getting my first few videos done because it felt like the piles of books were looking at me, and this was his response. But are they taunting, mocking, challenging, or enticing? Who knows? So the last few books that I finished in April begin with Beautiful Creatures by Lulu Taylor. So this fulfilled the Magical Readathon restoration prompt, which was a book with 4+ stars on Goodreads, and this just about managed that. This is another one that I picked up in a charity shop. I picked it up because it just looked like my kind of book, but it turned out that I have actually read one of hers before, The Winter Secret, which I liked mostly. And again, I think this one I liked mostly. It's very ridiculous. It's very over the top. It's about a pair of twin sisters, Octavia and Flora, who have been brought up secluded in the country away from the rest of society for various reasons. And then they inherit a frankly obscene amount of money on their 21st birthday and are released into the world and then have to find their way amidst lots of other ridiculously wealthy people. So, it's interesting that I very much connected to and related to Flora right from the start. She's very sympathetically portrayed. Octavia, not so much. It fluctuated back and forth throughout the book because she makes some quite questionable choices and doesn't seem to be a particularly great person for the most part. But the relationship between the two of them was very well drawn, and I did end up liking Octavia by the end. It's very fun. It's quite silly. And then it takes an incredibly dark turn about halfway through, where one of the female characters is subjected to extended and quite explicit abuse by a man. So content warnings for that, if that's an issue for you. And tonally, massive shift. So that was a bit weird, but it then picked up again towards the end. I was a little bit disappointed by where they ended up because the pair of them mostly got into trouble by entrusting their affairs to men, and mostly got out of trouble by entrusting their affairs to men. So that was a bit of a shame. Although they did both take control of their destinies to a certain extent by the end, and they also had quite a lot of help from some other awesome female characters, so it wasn't as bad as it looked like it was going to be. I thought going into this it was going to be a solid 4-star read. Dipped a bit here and there, so I'm going to give it 3.5, which is, the trend of this video. So that's Beautiful Creatures by Lulu Taylor. Next up, I had a coincidental serendipitous book haul. I was buying books for a specific reason online, secondhand, and I was going to get another one free if I bought another one. So I went with Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt, which has been recommended to me a lot and was on my wish list. And then it turned out that one of the Magical Readathon prompts for spells and incantations was to read a book which had a word in the title that was the same as a word in the title of the previous book that you'd read. So, of course, going from Beautiful Creatures to Remarkably Bright Creatures worked out pretty well. That was the only thing, unfortunately, that worked out pretty well with this book, because it really didn't work for me at all. I don't think it's a bad book. It was well written, but it's about an octopus in a Washington State aquarium and the various humans that interact with him and have connections to each other. And I don't know, the octopus viewpoint was just a bit weird. I mean, I'm a fantasy reader. I read quite a lot of books which are set in a relatively normal world similar to ours with a bit of a twist, but the rest of the setting was so mundane and so real world, and the way that the octopus was involved in the story and having the octopus viewpoint just really jarred for me. There was a massive disconnect and it just didn't work. And then on top of that, there was an elderly protagonist, Tova, which I always appreciate, and a younger protagonist, Cameron, who I just didn't really like at all. I didn't really connect to Tova either. It was just really no emotional engagement, even though it's the kind of book that would normally appeal to me, with disparate characters coming together and sort of found family and improving each other's lives through various circumstances. I don't know, it just didn't work for me, unfortunately. I feel a bit bad because I pushed through because I really wanted to finish it for the Magical Readathon and be able to log it for that. and complete the spells and incantations class. Otherwise, I might have DNF'd it, if I'm honest. And I don't rank books I DNF, so I don't have that, negative aspect on my reviews. But I did push through and finish this one, and I think I'm going to have to give it 2 stars because it really didn't work for me, unfortunately. So sorry about that. But I know there's an awful lot of people out there who absolutely love this book. And I'm sure that a lot of other people, if you want to pick it up, it sounds like a fun read with an octopus and a heartwarming story of people finding connections in the world. I'm sure a lot of people would love it. I'm not saying it's a bad book at all. I think it just didn't work for me during the period that I read it. So there you go. And then the last book that I finished in April was for the shapeshifting class for the Magical Readathon Spring Equinox semester, which was to read a book with a dragon either in the title, on the cover, or in the story. And I picked Miss Percy's Pocket Guide to the Care and Feeding of British Dragons, which fulfilled all 3 of those prompts, because obviously all about dragons. And this, I don't have a huge amount to say. It's by Quenby Olson, I should say, which is a great name. Love that name. Don't have a huge amount to say about this, but I really enjoyed it. Absolutely loved it. Again, slightly older protagonist. She's 40. The love interest is also in his early 40s. Love a romance between people in their 40s. Don't know what to tell you. Just really appeals to me, probably because I'm in my 40s. Kind of Victorian setting, I think. And yeah, Mildred makes a great protagonist. She is stuck kind of living with her sister's family because she hasn't got married, and she's like looking after the sister's kids and not being appreciated. And then she obtains an unexpected inheritance, and part of that is a stone which she and the local vicar are investigating along with various other things that are in the inheritance. And then it hatches into a dragon and shenanigans ensue. There was a certain amount of threat introduced, but overall it was pretty cozy, pretty low stakes. Loved the characters, particularly liked the vicar's housekeeper, Mrs. Babington. She was great. I felt Mildred's sister was a bit of a caricature at times. Wasn't so keen on her presentation, but that's by the by. Yeah, really enjoyed it. I'm going to give this one 4 stars. So ended on a high note in terms of my reading for April. And that's all the books I finished in April. Okay, so this is a frankly ridiculous pile of books to have finished in April, plus the audiobooks that I listened to, brings to a total of 14, which I don't think I've ever read that many books in a month in my life before. Sorry, Stanley. I'll try and put them this side. I mean, this is just silly. Magical Readathon definitely had me prioritising my reading. I am seriously hoping, and I'm sure you are too, by the time we've got to the end of this mammoth video, that I'm going to be reading quite a lot fewer books in future months. I'm going to put them down because they're quite heavy. It's silly. I would like to relax more into my reading. My husband Dave laughed hysterically at me when I told him that, at the idea of me relaxing into anything. But hey, I should say, in terms of my top book for the month, basing it just on the ratings, we have The Word for World is Forest by Ursula K. Le Guin and Miss Percy's Pocket Guide to the Care and Feeding of British Dragons by Quenby Olson, because they were the 2 that got 4 stars. Completely opposite books. Totally opposite. This one is very hard-hitting, very grim, quite unpleasant, political science fiction. And the other one is sort of real-world-ish set, Victorian fantasy, very cozy. So I guess it shows my eclectic taste. This one is objectively the better book, but I enjoyed the Dragon book more. So make of that what you will. Anyway, so in terms of May, I do have, I think, 9 books on the TBR. So I've got the Magical Readathon monthly prompt. I've got the 4 prompts that I picked from my TBR prompt jar. I'm probably going to listen to a couple of audiobooks. I have family book club coming up at the end of May, so I've got to read my dad's pick for family book club. And I've also got the book that I'm reading for the Reviews Revisited series on this channel. So that's going to be 9 books. So we'll see how we go. That's quite a few less than 14. But yeah, it's still quite a lot. So the whole relaxing plan, probably not going to go to plan, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Anyway, that brings me to the end of this first wrap-up video. Sorry it was so long. Hopefully it won't be quite so long next time. Give me a wave emoji to let me know you're here if you made it this far, and maybe a Goldilocks comment. I've never done this before, so we're learning as we go. Goldilocks comment on the length and depth of this first wrap-up video, taking into account that there will be fewer books in upcoming months. So too long, too short, just right. Very happy to receive feedback as we go on this journey. If you want to find out anything more about my other projects, the podcast, my blog, my own books that I have written, Stanley's content, please see the links in the description box. And you have also seen, you can't see it at the moment, but the t-shirt I'm wearing, Stanley merch is available. Anyway, so I think I'm gonna stop there. Please do like and subscribe if that feels appropriate to you. Obviously, if you want to find out more about The 3 by Sarah Lotz, that's going to be coming up in my next video, which is the Reviews Revisited series. I'm going to do a deep dive analysis of that book and then compare it to the review that I did the first time I read it. And yeah, I think that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.